Hello, welcome to the 3.3 Stormwater Science video. This is the third part of the three-part series and the last video of all the Stormwater Science videos. In here, we will continue to explore the scenarios after the storm event, and to do that, we will actually transform all the data that we collected in our tables into graphs to continue to understand the impacts of stormwaters in the water quality of our rivers. So, let's do it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at our watershed model with our different communities. And after talking about the different compounds that we can find in the water right next to each of these communities, we're going to look at how much this scenario changed after a storm event. So don't panic. That is a little bit what happened after a storm event and the different water composition that we had right next to each of these communities. And we're going to compare it to before the storm event. So if you see before, after, so definitely you can see that there is a lot more of some of the stuff and not as much of some of the other stuff. We need to figure out exactly what is happening. So to do that, you are going to grab this data sheet that we used last time, and we are going to record the numbers that we get for the after the storm event to see and be able to compare how much they change. Maybe they increase, maybe they decrease, maybe stay the same. So we're going to do that real quick all together. Okay, so we're going to start with the upstream eco-friendly town. And as you can see here, we have 3 turbidity cards, 2 dissolved oxygen, 1 healthy macroinvertebrate, and we have 0 for the unhealthy. So far looking good. We had all different fish biodiversity. We have 2 E. coli and 1 nutrient. Now, the next one is going to be the cattle range. And for the cattle range, we have 3 turbidity cards, 2 dissolved oxygen, 1 healthy macroinvertebrate, and 1 unhealthy macroinvertebrate. And for the fish biodiversity, we have 0 for the blue species, 2 for the pink species, 1 for green, and 1 for gray. Then we have 3 E. coli's and 3 nutrient cards. The next is going to be the agricultural field. For the agricultural field, we have 1 turbidity, 2 dissolved oxygen, 1 healthy macroinvertebrate, and 1 unhealthy. We have 0 for the blue species of fish, 1 pink, 2 green, and 1 gray. We have 1 E. coli card, 3 nutrients, and 4 pesticides. The urban city, which is the one that has the most stuff, we have 1 turbidity card, 1 dissolved oxygen, 1 healthy macroinvertebrate, and 2 unhealthy. For the fish biodiversity, we have only 2 pink and 2 green, but none of the other 2. We have 3 E. coli cards, 3 nutrient cards, 2 pesticide, 4 trash, 3 oil and gasoline, and 3 medicine. And finally, for the downstream eco-friendly town, we have 3 turbidity cards, 2 dissolved oxygen, 0 healthy macroinvertebrates, and 2 unhealthy macroinvertebrates. We have 4 pink species of fish, and that's it, nothing else. 2 E. coli cards and 1 nutrient card. So, in summary, that's what you should get. You should get all the numbers for after the storm event, so the ones in red. So take a minute to double check that you got the right numbers. And after that, I gotta say, that is a lot of numbers, and you might be feeling a little overwhelmed and really not making much sense of it. Sometimes what happens when we get data, when we get numbers, is that we put it in a table, and when we look at the table, that doesn't mean much to us. They are just numbers. So what it's helpful to do in these cases is to graph the data. So what we're going to do is we're going to transform this table into different graphs so we can better understand what is happening into this watershed after a storm event compared to before the storm event. So let's do it. And the way we're going to do that, this is an example of the graphs that we're going to be doing. You don't have to do it that way, but that's the way I went about it. So this is going to be a bar graph, and this represents the urban city. What we have in the x-axis is the different type of cards. And in the y-axis, we have the number of cards. So how many, the quantity. Now, The blue represents the cars before the storm event, and the red represents the amount of that particular car after the storm event. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be going over each of the different cards of the different parameters, and I'm going to either highlight it in yellow, like I do in here, or I'm going to show it with an arrow in the case of biodiversity. Okay, so what I want you to do is take a minute to graph your own data using the same type of graph, or if you want to get creative and use another type of graph, you can go for it. But I want to make sure that you take a minute to graph your data before we do the comparisons, because I'm going to be showing you the graphs but shrink kind of little to be able to see all of them at once. So take a minute to graph the different data for the 5 communities that we have. Okay, so if you had some time to graph your data, you should have graphs looking a little bit like this. What I've done is I've merged all the different graphs into our watershed model, so we can actually think about the different parameters and how they are changing when you go from upstream to downstream, right? How the water is moving and the direction is also important to understand how these numbers are changing. So we're going to start with the turbidity. And as you can see here, I highlighted in yellow. And we're going to look at the turbidity for the places that had increased. So has changed it for worst, if you will. So we have the upstream eco-friendly town has definitely increased. It went from 1 to 3. Another place that has increased in the urban city, where it has gone from 1 to 2. Then we have the downstream eco-friendly town that has gone from 1 to 3. In the other 2 places, in the agricultural field has either not increased or decreased, and the Carroll Range has actually decreased. Interesting. The next one is dissolved oxygen. And dissolved oxygen has actually decreased in all 5 communities. Some has decreased more than others, but in general, all of them have suffered a decrease of dissolved oxygen after a storm event. Then we have the macroinvertebrates, and what we're interested in seeing is have the healthy macroinvertebrates stayed or have the unhealthy macroinvertebrates increased. And what we can see is that in the upstream eco-friendly town, the healthy macroinvertebrates have decreased, but the unhealthy are not present yet. In places like the agricultural field, the healthy macroinvertebrates have decreased, and also the unhealthy macroinvertebrates have increased. The same happens for the urban city. And finally, in downstream is probably the case where we see like a more drastic change, which is that we have very little healthy macroinvertebrates, but a huge increase of unhealthy macroinvertebrates after a storm event. Then we have fish biodiversity, and we can say that upstream eco-friendly towns stayed the same throughout, so that's good. But for all the other cases, the fish biodiversity went down, and the biggest change has been in the downstream eco-friendly town, because we went from having 4 type of fish to having just 1. So based on these graphs, which community do you think has the highest biodiversity? Take a minute, look at your graphs, and try to answer that question. Okay, so finally we have merged together most of the synthetics, but also the E. coli as non-synthetic and the nutrients to see the rest of these components. We have E. coli that definitely has increased after storm event in the upstream eco-friendly town. Also, the pesticide has increased, but the rest, there's no appearance. Then we have in here that E. coli has stayed the same, but pesticides, herbicides, and also fertilizers have increased. Here, E. coli increased, and also pesticides and herbicides have increased. Here, E. coli increased, and all the other pesticides and herbicides have increased as well, and all the other components have also appeared, and not also appeared, but also increased after storm events. And finally, the downstream eco-friendly town, where we don't have as many components as the urban city, but definitely the E. coli has increased, and the pesticides and herbicides have increased after storm event. So, based on these summary graphs that I have shown you here, which community gets the most polluted water over time after a storm event? Again, in these numbers, we're mainly looking at the direct result of after storm event. So it's kind of a snapshot of what happens in the water right after a storm event. But when you think over time, as the water flows downhill, which community would have the most polluted water after a storm event? Okay, so we have looked at the changes in the water composition after a storm event, and also what are some of the things that this water is picking up along the way during a storm event that might be in fact impacting the overall composition of the water. A little bit how we had this picture at the beginning. You can see the river in this place during a storm season when there is a lot of precipitation happening. You can also see is some of the consequences of results when this water finally flushes downhill, and you can see what might be left under it. So something to keep in mind. Based on that, what do you think you can do to reduce the impact of storm water into an ecosystem? Have you thought about that question throughout the lesson? Can you think of any ways that you personally can reduce the amount of pollution that we get into the water in our Rio Grande? I would like to take a minute to step back and wonder why we talk about this. We talk about this because we have been presenting a lot of scenarios that are applicable to New Mexico, to Albuquerque, to your city. And because you are living in it, you're part of it, there's things that you can do to slowly help and hopefully contribute to change the water quality of our river. Now, there is different ways that you can do that. Maybe you want to do it individually, a little bit what I was asking you before. What are some of the things that you can do to change the scenarios after the storm and how the water gets polluted after the storm? Maybe that is pick up more trash, as we can see this example here. That is a good thing that you can do individually. Then there's things that you can do with your family to also help reduce the impact of storm water into our river and the water quality in our river. And then there's things that you can do as a community. Maybe you're not old enough to vote, but maybe you can think about things larger than that. Maybe it's joining an organization that fights to restore the health of the Rio Grande and the water quality. If you want to take an extra step, I invite you to think about everything you've learned in these lessons and write a letter to your mayor about. Maybe you can talk about what worries you about New Mexico's environment and why it worries you, and also maybe some solutions that you would like to see done to make a difference. That would be some points that you could add into your letter. So for now, we're going to leave it here. This is the overall summary for these 3 videos altogether. We all live in a watershed. We have learned that our actions impact the water quality and the communities downstream of us. So if you looked at your graph, you probably saw that eventually, over time, the communities that are going to get more impacted is the ones that are getting all the pollution from upstream. So a downstream community, definitely, even if it's an eco-friendly town, is going to end up getting way more pollution because it's accumulating from all the communities that are upstream of them, either if they are eco-friendly or if they are a giant urban city that releases way more pollution. Eventually, downstream is where all it accumulates. So it's something to think about. We also talked about that storm events in urbanized areas in general worsen the water quality in that watershed. Some vocabulary that we have talked over these 3 lessons has been aquifer or groundwater, a storm drain, arroyo, detention basin, runoff, erosion, watershed, tributary, point source and non-point source pollution, turbidity, macroinvertebrates, bioindicator, biodiversity, E. coli, nutrients, flash flood, permeable and unimpermeable soils. And I'm sure that I've forgotten other ones that you can please add into your notebook or your journal as vocabulary to remember for later. Finally, I want to leave you with a potential activity that you can do to help keep the watershed clean. We invite you to create either a drawing or directly build with materials a possible solution to reduce one of the human impacts exposed in this lesson. And the human impacts can either be water pollution, for example, E. coli that comes from animal poop, expired medicine and other chemicals. Then we have erosion or biodiversity lost. I will end up thanking you all for participating in these 3 video series talking about stormwater science. Please share with me any questions, comments, or any project ideas if you are not doing any of these activities that we propose you. You can use the email below, bem.education@bem.org, and we'll make sure to answer any questions or any findings. And thank you for listening.